Well, thanks everyone for coming. This is being recorded, so we can send this out afterwards along with the slides. Thanks all for coming. My name is Marcus. I am a PhD student here in SAFS.
And I'm Laura. Oh, I guess I can just go like this. Hello, I'm Laura. I am a PhD student in SAFS.
Cool. And just to get a quick lay of the land in terms of who's here, I don't know how to do this with Zoom land, but who here is an undergrad? Okay. Is anyone on Zoom not an undergrad?
I'm a master's student. My name's
Okay. And then what departments are you from? Like marine biology?
I'm in SAFS.
ESRM? SAFS? Is SAFS and ESRM different?
You know, that might be a question for you. So I'm here in SAFS. I don't really know.
Are you saying SAPS with an A or SAPS?
SAFS with an E.
Oh, okay. So SAPS with A.
Oh, SAFS with an A.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
And those are different.
Those are definitely different. Yeah. Cool.
Are you SAFS with an A as well?
Nice. Fishy crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, what we'll be talking about today, let's sort of split into two halves, and I'll take the first half, and then I'll pass it over to Laura for the second half. So, the first part is going to be just talking about what the GRFP is, why you'd want to apply and who should apply, and then talking about eligibility criteria. And then I'll kick it over to Laura for the second half, which is going to be talking about the workshop that we offer every fall for applicants, what that entails. And then for people who plan to apply this fall and maybe participate in the workshop, start talking about what you should probably be doing now or soon to start preparing. And then talk a little bit about what reviewers are looking for to have it in your mind as you start to prepare your application. So start off with a little bit of motivation. This is an actual email that I received when I was looking into graduate programs. So I emailed this professor. I sent this long email with the CV and told him how interested I was in his lab. And I got back this. Hi, Marcus. Thanks for the interest. I'm not planning on taking any new students in the coming year, primarily due to limited funding. I will consider students with their own funding, NSF GRFP. Best, that guy. All right. So what I took away from this was apparently funding is a really, really big hurdle for graduate school, and having a fellowship like the NSF GRFP in your back pocket can make people change their minds about whether or not they want to accept you as a student. So clearly quite influential. Now, for what the GRFP actually is, these are fellowships offered by the National Science Foundation for graduate study in a research-based Master's of PhD program. So these are programs where you are doing your own research, and that is the focus of your program. There are about 2,500 of these fellowships available every year across all STEM fields. This varies a little bit year to year, depending on the federal budget. And they get upwards of 12,000 applications, so the success rate is about 20%. This fellowship is a little bit unique in that, as opposed to some other grants that you can apply for, the NSF GRFP funds you, the individual, not the project that you are proposing. So what that really means is that you don't actually have to carry out what you're proposing in the research plan that's part of this application. So really they're looking at you and trying to determine if they see potential for you, the researcher, in this field in the future. And you submit this application, and the people who review your application are just people that are in your field, from academia, from government, that's selected by NSF, and they will read all these applications. They read a ton of these applications, and then they score them, and then from that they select their list. So we started talking about this a little bit already, but why would you want to apply for the GRFP? First is that the GRFP provides basically no strings attached funding for you as a graduate student. So again, as I mentioned, there aren't really any requirements for the GRFP besides that you're enrolled in a graduate program doing research. And having your own funding through this source gives you a ton of flexibility because of what you're doing in grad school. So grad school, you're often funded on the grant by a professor to do research. GRFP is different in that it's funding you, so you have a lot more agency over what you decide to do in graduate school, and you can pick the questions that you're really interested in studying. We talked about this already, but the funding hurdle is really huge for getting to grad school. And so the GRFP is like a golden ticket to get over that. And sort of some more intangible things. The application will make you think pretty hard about what you want to study, and about what your goals are in terms of research and professional and personal goals. And then the last thing is that people recognize it looks good on your CV. It'll help you a lot in applying for any sort of jobs or things after grad school. All right, the fun stuff. This is a bunch of legal stuff, but this is a bunch of text that's taken directly from NSF for the GRFP. First is you have to be a US citizen or have national permanent resident status. So I'm not sure if that applies to everyone in this room, but that's the first criteria because it's a US federal government grant. Second is that you have to intend to enroll or be enrolled in a research-based master's or doctoral degree program in an eligible field of study in STEM or STEM education. You can't have previously accepted a GRFP or applied to the GRFP while you were in grad school, and you can't have a PhD. I don't know why you'd apply for it if you had a PhD. Yeah, quick question, Sarah.
I'm just wondering, since like intent to enroll and be enrolled time, like, is there like proof of that you have to show, or is that just like a simple like, I do intend to apply, or I have been accepted, or do you have to like show that you have been accepted, or that you intend like submit an application?
Just quick check, do people online, were they able to hear that question or no?
Yeah, we could hear it.
Yes, thanks, Amira. Yeah, so I don't know if you know the answer to this, Laura. You do?
I think I do.
Okay.
So as an example, I have a friend who applied and she didn't have to show proof that she didn't apply anywhere, but she hadn't gotten accepted by the time that she received the NSF. So what she did is she actually called back colleges that she had already applied to say, and they had rejected her, to say, hey, do you want to reconsider now that I have you accept? So this is all to say you don't have to be accepted, nor do you have to show proof that you are applying. But the way the timeline works is you're going to want to be applying,
Right.
because you have to be in a program to receive it.
Right.
But you can say like you don't know where you're going yet.
Okay.
But it can be strategic to say that you know where you're going, even if that's not where you're going.
Oh,
If that makes sense.
okay. So you have to make a statement about where you want to go though?
There's an option in the form. So you can say that, or you can say you don't know, but then in the essays, you can say, this is my top choice for this reason. That can be a strategy if you want.
Okay.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay.
This will get fleshed out a lot more in the
Yes.
workshop if you're applying this fall.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Two questions. One, I was told that once you've completed a year of a graduate program, you're no longer eligible to apply. Is that true? And two, what if you are not possibly planning on attending a university in the US, but you are a US citizen?
So you want to take the GRFP funding abroad?
Yes.
I don't know what the rules are about that.
I'll do a quick search and let you know.
This is why we have two people running this workshop. To your question about graduate enrollment, this was the most confusing bullet in the solicitation, but I'll read it to you. So the other eligibility criteria is that individuals with prior graduate enrollment who have completed more than one academic year in any graduate degree granting program, earned a previous master's degree of any kind, or earned a professional degree must meet the following requirements. They must not be enrolled in a graduate degree program at application deadline and 2 or more consecutive years past graduate degree enrollment or completion at the application deadline. All that is to say is basically it boils down to this, which is that if you're a graduate student, you can either apply in the fall of your first year or in your second year, right? So if you are in your second year, you've only completed 1 year, right? All of this stuff before that, this is just sort of like if you were in grad school and you dropped out, or you were in grad school and finished a degree, you can apply, but you have to meet these special requirements that you basically took a long enough gap. And then you are eligible to return and apply for the GRFP again.
I have an answer to the second question. So you have to be enrolled at a US university. So if you are enrolled at UW, but all of your research takes place abroad, that's okay. but you can't apply to like the University of Oxford. It has to be US University.
So we started talking about this, but the number of applications you can submit is a big question. Personally, I applied for the GRFP 3 times and finally got it on my 3rd try. So the reason I was able to do that is because before you've enrolled in graduate school, so if you're currently an undergraduate senior, so you have to be a senior to apply because you have to be able to enroll in graduate school the next year. And people who are post-bac, so have a bachelor's degree, who haven't yet entered graduate school have no restrictions on the number of times they can apply before enrolling. So yeah, I applied as an undergraduate senior. I applied between grad school and undergrad. You can apply as many times as you want, so it doesn't really hurt to apply for the GRFP before you've gotten into grad school. Yeah, Sarah.
I was just wondering, like, so when you're like reapplying, did you basically like rewrite like what you had and then like just like revise it to make it better, or did you like scratch it completely and like /do you have to come up with a new idea?
So questions about how, if you're reapplying a bunch of times with, you know, given that you have this eligibility, do you just start over or do you just revise things? I ended up scrapping most of mine each time because I realized it could be a lot better. I think also often things will be changing quite a lot for you. As an undergraduate, you graduate, maybe you have this really cool job somewhere that really is going to be a big part of maybe your personal statement. And so in that case, you'd want to restructure your essays to go around that. So like a lot of elements carried over from year to year, but as you added new stuff, I would restructure a lot, and my proposals were quite different from year to year. So yeah, but that's again something we'll talk a lot more about in the workshop.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, different strategies depending on where you're at. So as opposed to people who are not yet in grad school, people who are in grad school, you basically have one chance to apply, and that's either in your first year or at the start of your second year. So that again satisfies the eligibility criteria where you cannot have completed more than 1 year to be able to apply. And you can't apply if you've already applied while in grad school. So this was actually a fairly recent change in the last 5 years. But now this can be part of your, if you're a graduate student, sort of the strategy about determining when you want to apply and when your application will be stronger. We'll talk more about that in the future. Okay, so that's eligibility information. If anyone has realized that they're not eligible and they don't want to stick around, I totally get that. And okay, sorry about that. Yeah. So can you get into grad school without funding? You can, so most research-based programs will require you to have, well, some research-based programs will require you to have funding to enter the program, but funding can come from both outside fellowships, of which the GRFP is one, but it can also come from, funding can also come from like the professor you want to work with. So that PI can have grants to fund students. And like there are people, for example, who are doing PhDs here in SAFs for international students. So yeah, you can totally get other funding from, you know, grants and stuff like that that your PI is on that don't have sort of nationality restrictions. Yeah. Okay, so a little more about what the GRFP, a little more getting the details of what the GRFP is. This is quite an extensive fellowship where you receive 3 years of full financial support that you can use over a total of 5 years. And basically, at the beginning of every year, you choose whether or not you want to be active, which means like whether or not you want to burn a year of your fellowship. And every year that you are active, you get $37,000 a year. The university gets $12,000 to cover like your benefits and stuff like that. And you get a waiver for tuition and student fees. So basically it covers everything you need to get covered as a graduate student. More of the fine print. This might be more applicable to graduate students, but if you're on GRFP funding, you cannot alternate between it and other funding within a school year, right? So if you commit to GRFP funding, that's for the entire, for 1 full calendar year, which is good, but also, you know, in graduate school, you might have there might be smaller, shorter term funding arrangements, like maybe, half a year as a research assistant. You cannot do that at the same time as a GRFP. It has to be like one full year. You also cannot have other concurrent federal funding. So if you are lucky enough to get 2 fellowships, you probably have to decline 1 if they're both from the federal government. And then people who are incoming fellows, I sort of mentioned before, but you're going to be expected to be currently enrolled when you're on GRFP funding. Or, so maybe to Sarah's question earlier, you have to have adequate preparations to begin graduate school and research by summer or fall the year the award is accepted. So, yeah, either enrolled or going to be enrolled. More fine print, this probably won't apply to many people, but you have to be a student the full year of your fellowship. You can't go on leave. You are allowed to change schools. Sometimes some students will transfer while on the fellowship, but there are some additional rules about that, where if you're transferring while on a GRFP, then you can't have a significant break and you need approval for any sort of longer break. Yeah, Sarah, question?
So like, what is like a year? Is it like school year, or is it like 2022 all the way to?
Yeah, so for the full year for using this funding, the way that it works is that you have a full year of funding starting either in the summer quarter or the fall quarter. And then it goes for a full year from that. So for example, if you start in the fall quarter, I think you start getting funding in October through the following September. So it's 1 calendar year starting October, but you can also have it start in the summer. So it starts in July, and it goes to the following June. So that's really the 2 options that you actually have once you, are using the funding.
But you can still take time when you're free, as long as it's under.
Yeah. Well, so this is more so about breaks are when you are on winter break, you're still enrolled. You're still a full-time student. It just means that you cannot be not doing any graduate research or program and still be getting GRFP funding. So yeah, spring, summer break or whatever, those things don't really count.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so people who are applying, this is not fully confirmed, but as we talked about, there's different sort of eligibility and restrictions on applying based on where you are in school. And so they have outlined 4 different levels for applicants. And we think that when you apply, you are sort of compared to other people at your same stage, right? So if you're an undergrad applying, you aren't going to be lumped together with the second-year grad students, because that's not really a fair comparison. So the way the NSF has outlined it is people who are not in grad school yet, people who are first-year grad students, people who are second-year grad students, and then people who are returning grad students who completed part of a degree program and then came back. Yeah.
Sorry to ask, but you said so roughly 20,000 people apply.
12,000.
Is the breakdown then even across those levels, or is there one level that I guess is more competitive because more applicants are applying, or is that information?
I have no idea. I'm not sure if NSF would release those sort of statistics.
Yeah, maybe they would, but.
Yeah. And Laura, let me know if there's anything. I see there's something to chat, so I'm not sure if it's anything that I need to address.
We're good for now.
Okay, cool. Okay, so all this to summarize is for applying to GRFP, should you apply? In this yes column, we put students who have a solid proposal idea, so an idea of what they want to do in grad school, places that you think you want to go to grad school because you have to apply and be enrolled in graduate school to be able to receive the award, and you're sure that you want to go to grad school. And this maybe column, we put if one of those things to the left don't apply to you. And also, we added this note this year, which is sort of, again, what Sarah was asking about with the competition of different levels. If you're a first-year grad student and your application will be stronger next year, again, you have 1 chance to apply as a grad student, so you might want to wait. That's what I did. As a first-year grad student, I knew that I'd have a stronger application the next year because I had a paper that was in review. And so I was like, I will have that published and it'll look at my CV will be much stronger, application will be much stronger. And so that's why I waited to apply. for no, if you're not sure about grad school, and then the second part is about, you have to write a research proposal, which Laura will talk a little bit more about. And so if you have like no idea what sort of research area or field you'd want to write a proposal in, then you're not gonna be able to write a very strong proposal. Okay, that's it for the first half. Are there any questions about anything we just talked about? Yeah.
Like, right, I guess, like, or you have like a solid proposal, like, I guess, like, is it something that you have had to discuss with like the professor or something, and it is tangible, or like, what makes it?
Yeah, as to what makes a solid proposal, I think yes, you will want to talk about it for sure with people who are quote unquote experts in your field. So faculty you've gotten to know, research scientists, etc., that you want to flesh that out with. That definitely helped me a lot. I don't know if you had what your experience with that was.
I guess what I would say too is if you aren't a graduate student yet, there's no reason not to apply. So like you might as well, especially because I applied before I was a grad student, and doing that work in advance infinitely helped me the second time I applied because I was able to build off of that foundation. And we'll go over things you can be doing now to prepare. But yeah, I feel like the short way of answering is like if you're thinking if you should apply or not in your undergrad, just apply. Because there's no penalty for doing that.
Right. Yeah, as long as you're applying to grad school at the same time.
Right.
Otherwise, there's no point. Yeah. Anything else? People on Zoom are welcome to put stuff in the chat, or you can just unmute and start talking. Yeah.
So, like I've written research proposals before, for like classes and Friday Harvard, how in depth you need to be, like, if you have your topic, you have kind of a rundown of the methods that you'd like to use, et cetera, like, what other kind of stuff really rounds it out to the point that it sounds like you've really done your research, you've thought it through. It's a physical plan, not that you have to carry out, but something that is feasible.
Yeah, so I think the proposal is only going to be 2 pages single space. So it's not that much time to get into a lot of detail. And a lot of that, as we'll talk about after this break, is going to be dedicated to specifically meeting NSF's intellectual merit and broader impacts criteria, and that'll take up probably a third of that space. So you have like a page and a third to go into your proposal. So you're gonna have, I think, I mean, based on what you outlined, I think you already have the basis for a strong proposal. You don't have to be super, super detailed. But again, the people who are reviewing your application are probably going to be pretty well. It's always hard to say because like your field is probably gonna be defined pretty broadly. Like one of the fields you can apply to when you're submitting your application is like life sciences ecology, right? So it's like someone who identifies as an ecologist will be reading your thing. So people might be really familiar with, I don't know, nearshore marine ecology. Some of them might be, totally terrestrial. So for level of detail, it's sort of a thing you have to, I don't know, redraft, get people's opinion on. It's a very iterative process. But if you have like already what you outline, I think that's a great starting point. Yeah, Crystal.
Let's say I'm a US citizen and I'm taking a break after finishing my undergrad. And then if I were able to apply for an NSF, I should be applying an NSF while I'm also applying for graduate school, like during that 1 year.
Yeah, so you're also going to be applying at the same time. So again, it sort of goes back to, right, these criteria. So you have to be either currently enrolled or have preparations to, and that is like for the year that you are awarded. So when the awards come out in April, and basically you have to start that fall. So in order to make that timeline work, you have to be applying the same fall you're applying for the GRFP. Yeah.
If I were applying to grad school and I'm like, I actively applied for GRFP, is it likely that they'll be like, okay, you're accepted conditionally, or like, is that something that they can do, or like, do you not tell them about the GRFP and that they like, you receive it? I guess, cause that would be after them.
I would mention it when you're talking to them because they'll want to know whether or not you might have a chance of outside funding. So what my experience was there was an advisor who was like, he told me like, oh, I think we might accept you, but depending on funding. And so they wouldn't, I don't think it's called a conditional acceptance, because often these like grad programs have these like, there's like a window when they can admit you, right? So like they can just leave it sort of like undecided until they hear from you. And then they might either accept you or reject you once they know whether or not you have funding. But I don't think I don't think it's really a conditional acceptance.
No.
Yeah.
I've heard of many people who have already established a relationship with a professor. The professor's like, great, love to have you. Let me know if you get the NSF and then we'll talk.
Okay, so then like, if you are initially like rejected, I guess, from all the grad school that you apply for the grad programs you apply to, and then like you do get the NSF, like do you recommend kind of like your friend like calling back or like reaching out again and like actually, or if they said like on basis of we won't be a good fit, just don't reach out to them again.
Yeah, I think depending on the program you apply for, especially in like environmental science, it's really advisor based more than school based. If you have an advisor who wants you, you're gonna get accepted. It's like really, it's like the advisor you're applying to more than the school, I feel like, in my experience. So, and usually the NSF comes out before the official acceptances for graduate programs come out, at least in my experience. But I would recommend doing what my friend did. It didn't work for her. She didn't change their minds. But it is a tactic that she did, and I think others have done.
Yeah.
Okay, you just said something about like a word coming out before, but I might be a little confused on the timeline. So you apply in October, you're back in April. How do you're back from NSF before having to like say, okay, say you apply to someone and they're like, okay, wait until the NSF, like that's April. That's a lot. That's like a long time into the process. You're typically going to be like saying yes to someone.
Because I'm trying to think of acceptances that come out in like March and April for graduate programs. So yeah, you have like a few weeks maybe of a turnaround there.
Okay. So
All right, I think I'll kick it over to Laura to talk about our workshop.
Yay!
We had a lot of fun looking at
Our favorite slide. Yeah.
Try and make this slide.
What's with the chicken? Like,
Yeah. What is with the chicken?
I just googled like scientist stock image, and this is what people decided were scientists. They're just wearing like coat staring at chicken. Also, like the guy who was just directly sniffing a test tube with like up his nostril.
Great.
like,
Anyway.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So we'll go over the workshop, but then we'll also go over what the application entails and some strategies for how to fit the criteria. But first introduce our workshop. So this is going to be going on starting in late summer and then going on through early fall, because the application, especially for the life sciences, is like October 10th in that range. But the goal of this workshop, and I took it last year when I was applying, and it was very helpful. The goal is for you to submit the NSF GRFP. And essentially we will look at what you are thinking of applying with, and then pair you with a mentor who has perhaps studied a similar thing. And you'll work iteratively with that mentor, and they'll look at your drafts and give you peer feedback. And then we'll also have sessions like this where we go over broader things as well. But the goal of this workshop is so that you can become a clear writer in your applications. You'll receive and give constructive criticism, and you'll learn to accept and filter that. And then right here underlined, the intellectual merit and broader impacts are the bread and butter of the NSF GRFP. There's different strategies, but my strategy is I had a header in both of my essays saying intellectual merit. I'm going to talk about that. broader impacts, I'm gonna talk about that, and that needs to be in both of your essays. We'll get into that. But yeah, within the workshop, we'll talk about how you can satisfy both of those two criteria. But yeah, that'll be coming out more later in summer, so we'll send out emails about that. The first thing to kind of address is that the GRFP takes a long time. This is a pretty intensive process. You're only writing 5 pages, but those 5 pages can feel pretty immense, especially because you are designing like an entire research proposal and somehow shrinking that into 2. And then you have to tell your entire life story in 3 pages. The nice thing is that when I did that, I used basically this GRFP application for my grad school essays. So at least you can double dip in that way. But it takes time. I would say about like, you kind of want to start thinking about it now, but then once you're in the writing stage, I did about 2 months of just writing, sending a draft to someone, getting their feedback, rewriting. So plan for that. We'll talk about what you can start doing now, but then I would budget 2 months before October, and that's about when our workshop starts. Really iteratively get into that writing process. This is the complete application package. This is everything you need. So you're going to have what is essentially your CV, but don't format a fancy CV because they have a form that you put your CV in and it's not well formatted, but that's okay. You're going to have your transcripts, your education, talk about your work research experience and like bullet points. You're going to want your proposed major field of study, and that can be pretty important because that determines who your reviewers are. Your reviewers are 3 random anonymous people that are often professors at like any US university. And so I am very interdisciplinary. I do social science and ecology. So it was a big decision to decide if I was going to go under the life sciences field of study or the social science field of study. I ultimately went life sciences, but that is something to think about if you are interdisciplinary, which discipline you say you're going to do. That doesn't have to be the one you end up studying, but it does determine who reviews your application. And then of course, honors, awards, publications. This is like this whole first bullet is just like your CV. And then we have our 2 essays, which we'll really dive into, but you have a 3-page personal essay, which is your story and who you are. And then you have a 2-page research statement where you're putting together a research proposal with an introduction, with methods, and then with its, as we said before, the intellectual merit and broader impacts. Transcripts, and then you're going to need 3 letters of rec. You only need 2 to actually be seen, but 3 is how many the reviewers will read. And I submitted 4 in case one of my letter writers didn't get it in on time. But 3 letters of rec, ideally from professors, folks in an academic setting. But then I also had my boss from my non-academic job be one of my letter writers as well.
Question?
Yeah.
So, so in the proposed major field of study, does it give you like a drop down menu or like selection? Because like I think just endless.
Yes, there's a drop down menu, and the fields of studies have different due dates for the application. So life sciences is always like the first one. But yes, there is a drop down. So life sciences would be like, if you are in the environmental field, probably click that one.
Okay, and then.
Sorry, can I just add real quick to that?
Mhm.
So regarding the deadlines, they are different, but they're all within like the same week.
True.
So it's not a massive difference. For the drop-down selections, if you are a fishy person, there's probably 3 options for you. There's going to be geosciences, marine biology, that's what I chose. There's going to be life sciences, ecology, and there's going to be geosciences, biological oceanography. Those are basically the 3 that, if you are doing marine research, or even freshwater for that matter, are probably going to be the ones that you're choosing between. So,
And then for the like letters of reference, how do you go about like what is a good letter of reference, like how far back? Like if you've established a relationship with a professor like freshman year and you kind of kept in touch, is that someone you want to go for, or is it someone you've had more recently who's like more notable or like has more citations or something like that? Like I guess how do you gauge a good letter or a good person for it?
So yeah, that's a hard question to answer. I ultimately did both. I chose one professor over another one because of how famous they were. But then I also chose people who weren't professors, but they were like a PhD advisor or they were a postdoc that I had worked with for like years. So ideally get both. But I guess the perspective to remember is that the people who are reading this application, they're a professor at some university. They're reading this over Christmas break. And they're reading this pretty fast.
Yeah.
So I know in my application, people reference where they're like, oh, she had really good letters of rec. And what they said was good was, oh, they spoke really positively of her. So it might be worth choosing someone who can speak positively of you over their like background or how successful they are. But it's a mix because you don't really know who you're gonna get.
Couple things to add real quick.
Mhm.
So, in the workshop, we always have Chelsea Wood come and talk about what makes a letter of reference and talk about strategies for that. And she'll be able to have, you know, an individualized discussion with you, or at least we will, about who to choose and why. And then, yeah, I think what you have to keep in mind for this entire application package, including the letters of reference, is intellectual merit and broader impacts, and how a letter writer will be able to speak about you in those two fields. And well, those fields are at the moment, but
That's a good point.
So when it comes to selecting the field of study, you were talking about like the sort of subcategories and stuff. So it seems like it gets pretty specific. Is there, I'm looking at the website right now and there's like the biology page, and then they have like this division of environmental biology, division of integrative organismal systems. Are those the categories or is it separate?
those are separate. So NSF has their different divisions, and then within those, they have like sub fields, so to speak. I think that the field of study in this application is not the same as like the division from NSF.
Okay, because I was just thinking like it would be nice to be able to sort of get an idea of what they are defining as each one of those categories and kind of see what
Right.
fit in best with.
Yeah, this is a conversation we can definitely have a lot more in the workshop, and this is something you decide when you submit your application. So you have a lot of time to think about it. Just one box to go check, one drop that you can select.
And then when you're doing that, is there, you know, like some people say that you have a better or worse chance of getting into like a college based on what major you select. Like if you select a more popular major, you might have a lower chance of getting in. Is that kind of the same thing for this? Like if you pick something that everyone else is picking, you're gonna have a lot more competition.
So I think there might be some element of that because I don't think NSF wants all of their awards to go to the same field, but I wouldn't let that discourage you from picking what you think is the best fit, because if it's not like people will recognize that they're like, this is not really that. I should have picked this other field. Advice that I got from a professor I worked with undergrad was like, he was like, if you're doing marine stuff, pick marine biology. Because it's a little more niche, it's a little more different than like life sciences, ecology is another option, and that's like so many people. So, yeah, I don't really know, like, and it sounds like a quota system or something like that, but yeah, I would say pick the best fit. It's not really as fast to answer, but
Yeah, because that'll ultimately determine who reviews it.
Yeah.
So you want it to be someone who is somewhat familiar.
So if you are, you get denied first time and you reapply, do you have like new sets of reference letter of recommendation? Because reuse them?
You can. You'll probably want them to update it because ideally within that year, you've like done more things that you want them to talk about, but you're probably not going to get the same reviewers. So they wouldn't know.
Like you said, do they only read 3?
They will only read 3. So you can submit 5.
What if you submit 5, they'll just pick 3.
You will list your preference of which letters you want them to read. So you can say, this is the most important, this is the second most important, this is the third most important. And then they won't probably touch the other two. It's more like a backup in case someone doesn't submit.
About the notice of reference, how many have to be academic versus like I would like a little bit, like I use that as a reference.
That would probably be an awesome reference. So I would definitely make sure to have academic letter writers, but they don't all need to be. I had someone from the NPS be a letter writer.
Is there like a ratio, like you want more academic over outside agency? Because that shows that you've been very academically involved, or like, I guess I'm asking very
Yeah.
specific questions.
Yeah, I mean, there's no tried and true formula. I will say the NSF, they want you to get your master's or your PhD, like they're trying to create researchers. So you're probably, and it's researchers who will be looking at it. So if you choose researchers, they're speaking more of that person's language. But I think having outside experiences, because broader impacts is a whole part of this, that shows that you can have applied impacts outside of research. So there isn't a formula, but I guess like you could do 2 research, 1 non-academic might be a nice blend there, but ultimately up to you.
Thank you.
Typically with regards to a proposal, at least like in the process of looking at private programs, a lot of advisors will ask, like, what would you be able to do now, that kind of thing. For the proposal for this, would we have to outline kind of like what would be available to us to be able to use? And if so, like, typically methods are based on someone else's methods. Do they require like a reference section saying, I want to do this with this?
Yeah.
I got my methods, or at least I designed my methods around this person's research.
Totally. I want to skip forward my slides a little bit. We'll go back to these other ones, but specifically for intellectual merit. So there's 2 things, there's intellectual merit and broader impacts. And part of the intellectual merit is how feasible. Do you know what you're doing? Do you know your tools? And how feasible is your research? So hello. So I think like there is a reference section. So if you are basing your methods and tools off of someone else's, I think it would strengthen it to cite them, because that's your way of saying, I know what I'm talking about. I've already selected my tool. And then, yeah, like, especially if you know, like, oh, I'm going to pull my data from this data source online, and you can point to where you're getting that data from. I do think specificity is your friend. It's just, you only have 2 pages. So you got to be like as concise as possible. But that's what I did, is I said, I'm going to do qualitative and quantitative surveys. This is the exact type of survey I'm going to do, developed by this person. I'm going to ask this many people and I expect this response rate. So I think that level of specificity is good. It's just making room for all of it is the hard part.
Because I mean, obviously we don't want to space for a reference section in your 2 pages.
Yes, and the way that people tend to do the reference section is like they really abbreviate it. We'll show you this in the workshop. So my reference section for like 15 references was only 4 lines. But yeah, like each line takes away a valuable line. So it's hard.
So I was gonna go back and look at this Sarah's question about letter writers.
Mhm.
I think sort of like thinking about like either coming from academia or agency or whatever, I think that comes fairly low on list of priorities for you to select.
Okay.
Like, you want the people who can write the most about you specifically.
Okay.
And so if you're choosing between, you know, an academic who like doesn't really know you that well, and like someone who's like, I don't know, was like a mentor at internship and like really like helped you with one-on-one for the whole summer, I'll pick that person.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So say Emily's here, gonna be probably a mentor for the workshop in the fall, so you're welcome to jump with any interesting questions too, if you contribute.
Yeah, I would second that you want people to know you well. Yeah, one of my reference writers was someone, a supervisor for a job.
Thank you.
Cool. How are we doing on time?
17, 18.
Cool, we're good. Okay, so we'll get more into the specifics, but this slide is for what you should be doing now, because you still have a good amount of time. It's May, so you are not in crunch time, but if you want to apply and you're thinking about it, start thinking about research questions of interest. And if you have a mentor to review that with, you can start asking their advice and their thought on it, but just start mulling that over in the head. What do I want to study and what do I want to propose? Knowing that this isn't what you actually have to study in grad school. But it's helpful if it is. You can use this as a tool to connect with potential PIs. I definitely worked with the PI that I am now working with at UW before I applied on this application, and it was a great way to kind of already start brainstorming and collaborating. You want it to be novel but feasible. So it is pretty punchy to say, no one's ever studied this before. That's like a nice hook to get someone excited about your research, but they will be looking at if it's feasible. For example, my entire proposal was focused on 2 individual wolves. And one of the feedback I got was, well, what are you going to do if those wolves die? Like, you need a backup plan. So you want to make sure that it can be conducted. And you can start your literature review. Like we talked about, you probably want to be somewhat conservative with how much references you put in there, but having in your introduction, being able to ground it in the literature and pull from like a good couple sites will be very helpful. Start reviewing your CV, and you can start thinking about opportunities to bolster both your intellectual merit and broader impacts, which we will describe. But for broader impacts, this could be some sort of community outreach or teaching opportunity that you can do over the summer. And then intellectual merit will be more like research positions, publications, things like that. And then identify potential letter writers. If you already know, it can be nice to reach out to someone way in advance. That's usually the strategy I do. So if you're already really comfortable with them, talk to them now. And then perhaps that can also lead to them reviewing your later drafts. Okay, so what are reviewers looking for? The GRFP funds individuals who make a comprehensive, holistic plan for the grad education, and they have demonstrated potential based on your pre-existing achievements. And this latter bullet point, that's where you'll get into it in your personal essay. That's when you say, these are all of the things I've already done. And sometimes a personal essay can feel like a glamorized CV in that aspect, but you do want to have a narrative there. And you want to use your education and research experience to convince the reviewer that you have a potential to be a leader in your field and that you are worth funding. So again, it isn't about your proposed research, it is about you in the end. And they do really like that leadership. For example, I had a line in mind that said something like, when complications arose in my research, I would schedule meetings with people and I would lead those meetings. So things like that, the initiative can be helpful. Okay, so the heart of the application are these 2 essays, this personal essay and this graduate research statement. They're independent essays, but they should complement each other. And I did reference in my personal statement, I referenced my research proposal. I had some lines where I said, oh, I've done this and this and this, and that relates to my research proposal in this way. So it is nice if they mirror each other. You're telling a compact story. And then these 2 things must be explicitly included in each essay. Let's dive into those. So intellectual merit is what is the potential of your, so the way this slide is formatted is orange is for your research statement and purple is for your personal statement. So in the orange up here, you're going to want to address how your proposed research advances knowledge and understanding. So that could be the novelty aspect of it. Is something that's creative, original, or transformative? And can it succeed? Like we said, is it feasible? Is it feasible? Is it well-reasoned? Is it well-organized? Is there a SAN rationale? And is there a mechanism to assess success? So that's when you're going to have a research question and like very specific hypotheses. And that was the hardest part for me, is actually putting together those hypotheses. And the reviewers did comment on them. And then for the personal, it's going to be how are you able to work as a member of a team as well as independently? So you want to talk about that. That'll bolster your intellectual merit. Communicating your research and interpreting it. And is there sufficient access to resources? So I knew that I was going to UW. So I just talked a ton about all the resources UW has. If you don't know where you're going, that's where that idea of citing your methods is going to really come in handy. Time check. How are we doing?
523. And
Cool.
I'll also add that we'll send out the slides and
Yes.
recording to everyone who RSVP. So if you didn't RSVP, but you want those, make sure you RSVP. And just so you don't feel like you just scribbled me out and take pictures. You're welcome to if you want, but I'm just saying you don't have to.
Definitely. And then so finally for the broader impacts. Okay, so if for intellectual merit, you're going to talk about these are publications I've done. These are research positions I've held. These are tangible skills I have in GIS or R, or this is that qualitative theory I have experience in. That's what you're all going to put in your IM. It's the more research side of your CV. Your broader impacts is now going to be looking at your research, but then also your potential to benefit society, your potential to broaden the participation of underrepresented groups. This third bullet point is really about education. They really do like any education things that you've been a part of teaching, but then also community outreach. I did a lot of interpretation, so I talked about that. Science communication, all of that is excellent. And this last slide speaks to that as well. So you can either say, this is when I've done this before, or you could say, this is a very concrete and specific way I will do it in the future if you haven't done it yet. So because I knew I was going to UW, I looked up science communication programs at UW, like volunteer programs. And I said, oh, I'll be a part of this or that. Or I was like, I'm going to be part of a DEI committee. So those are things that you can say if you haven't done those things yet. And then pretty much that applies to your personal statement as well. And then for your research statement, you would have a section at the end that says, okay, this is my hypothesis. This is my research question. Now, this is my plan to share my findings. That would be a broader impact. I also put for my broader impact, like the inherent value of conservation, where I was like, saving wolves is important for the planet in this way. And that was another BI that I included. And okay, we have made it to the end. Do we have any questions? Yes.
You guys keep mentioning about workshop, is that a course that you want to?
Yeah, so it's not a course, it's just something that anyone is welcome to be a part of. And we'll be sending out more emails, like email blasts about it, to SAFs and CEFs and SMEA and others. And it's an assembly of graduate students or other people who have experience applying for grants, and they will mentor anyone who is thinking of applying for a grant.
That will be, do you have to be a current student at UW, or if you graduate, you can still attend overseas online exam, or should be the first?
Yeah, I mean, we would encourage in-person interaction, but we have always had an online option in the past. So people are at Friday Harbor, people are wherever. We'll still have the opportunity to participate, but you do have to apply for the GRFP this fall to be part of the workshop.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I was a part last year and I wasn't a UW student. So yeah.
Would highly recommend. It helped me a lot with my application. I think there's like a large, surprisingly large percentage of the people actually got GRFP this past year.
And your intellectual merit, like where you're talking about like your skills and like stuff and stuff like that. I guess like how do you balance like sounding like qualified and like I'm a robot and so and
Totally. Yeah. In my first draft, that was one of the feedback I got from my advisor, is I kind of just listed, it was like a narrative CV. I just listed everything I'd done. And the biggest feedback was like, make this into a story. They were always like, remember this person, it's late at night, it's holiday break, and they're tired and they want something that catches their attention. So most essays, at least a personal essay, start with a really rich narrative. Like, when I was 5, I saw my first orca and it changed my life. But I think a theme can be helpful, where I we'll look at examples, but the way I changed that is instead of just like listing things, I was like, I kind of told it chronologically and then explained like my doubts throughout the process and what made me choose one thing over the other. So the more of a theme you can get and the more of the narrative you can get, ultimately that is better. And what that meant is I couldn't include everything. I ended up cutting out some things so I could really tell the story.
But you'd rather do that than include it.
I think so, because I think some of it is how good of a writer are you? You know, what is your, like, does your story sell someone or captivate someone? Are they inspired by you as a person? And your CV is provided. So they can look at your CV and see like, oh, these are things that this person didn't mention. But I think, I'm curious for other thoughts, but I would prioritize story over getting everything in there.
So it's kind of like sharing your internal.
A little bit. Yeah, like like I talked about changing my major and like the doubts that went into that. So like, yeah, you want it to be emotional. Like it wants to feel like you're a protagonist of a story in some way.
Yeah, you have to like build the tension some way. I didn't have like deep conflicts or anything in mind, but it was like, oh, like these are my interests and I couldn't figure out how to like add them all together. And then I found, ecology and, or, something like that. And some of the advice that I got that was really helpful was, at some point, like everybody is like, you reach a point, all the applicants are like qualified to get the funding and you need to convince someone to like go into the like little review board or whatever and like fight for you and be like, this student is the one that deserves the funding. And so having that like narrative and that story and capturing their attention like will help convince them that you're the one worth fighting for.
Yeah.
I think also, if you wouldn't mind flipping back to like the complete application package.
Yeah.
But think of this as like, they printed out everything and stamped it together, and then someone read the package, right? So that's another reason why the narrative is important. And again, thinking about your two statements as being complementary too, is your personal essay narrative should lead into your proposal pretty seamlessly. Like it should be like, oh yeah, okay, I understand why, Marcus wanted to study, marine coastal food webs, because I really like how we got here totally makes sense to me, right? So thinking about not only the narrative within your personal statement, but also how that leads into the next thing, which is the graduation statement. Last questions? It's 5:30, so maybe you're pretty
Ooh,
good.
right on time.
I don't know. Like, how do you avoid the like, SMR for those 5 statements?
Totally, because I have a feeling that probably gets old.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was in another NSF class and literally everyone's first intro was when I was 10 years old. I mean, you can get creative with it. What I ended up doing is I actually started my narrative intro, not when I was 5, but with my undergrad thesis. And I was like, I drop people into the scene and I'm like, I'm on, this rangeland and I'm jumping over fences. And so I didn't have that childhood tie-in, but I gave a very rich narrative description of the research that I was the most excited about doing. And that was my passion pull, as opposed to saying, when I was 10, I wore graphic wolf tees every day. So I guess, yeah, if you have research you're excited about right now, you can use like that as the hook maybe, or something else.
So like, it doesn't necessarily do you any favors to like be like, oh, I wanted to do this like for a really long time. It's not like a spur of the moment, all of a sudden I want to be marine biology. Like, like I guess you don't really have to establish that.
I don't think so. I think, like Marcus said, it makes sense if everything you've done somehow feels like it maps on to what you're doing now. But I don't imagine someone would, depending on how you tell your story, if I learned that someone got into wolves when they were 10 versus 20, like me as the reviewer, I'm not going to weight one or the other.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, I might go ahead. Oh, does anyone on Zoom have any questions?
There's no one left on Zoom.
Oh, they're all gone. Okay, fantastic. Well, let's go ahead and close.